Alex live as I do every Thursday for the Thursday Night Football Showdown. Here to talk a one-game NFL slate with a lot of money up top, the Brownies, the Steelers. Myself, Ben Raza, here with the man himself, Alex Baker. Not a bad game. We were talking a little before the show. This is actually a pretty good one to break down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a pretty close one between the Steelers and Browns. And what that means is there should be a lot of good DFS options, and we don't have to necessarily all be splitting this money tonight.
Yeah, it's a competitive game. We're going to break it all down. I do want to say right off the top, as I do, because we've been doing a ton of giveaways and a ton of promos, we have another one today, and it's the same one as we've been doing for Thursday Night Football. So if you go to our Twitter page at awesemo.com, all you got to do is like and retweet and respond with the player with the most fantasy points tonight. Totally free, and the winner gets an Awesemo Plus season pass for NFL. Obviously, a ton of value there. Get all Alex's tools and everything else we have going on behind the paywall. So I just want to throw that out right off the top. We've got a lot of exciting things going on. But you said it, the Browns at home, slight favorite in this game. Both teams really need the game. I don't know if either can survive and make the playoffs without it. But what are your just very initial thoughts, and then we'll dive on in.
Well, I saw FanDuel move the Steelers into their top 10 in the power rankings. So,
well, that's a game changer.
Yeah, you got to think that. I mean, top 10 team, that's better than the Browns. So let's go.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I mean, so Cleveland is on mega life support. They did win last week against the Bills. They needed it desperately. The Steelers started 0-3, have righted the ship. They're 5-4 right now. And they're 2 out of the next 3 games are against the Browns. These are pseudo-elimination games that we've got. And from a showdown standpoint, of course, a competitive game, I think, doesn't make it as polarizing in terms of some of these ridiculous ownerships we've been getting. So again, just before we get into it, we got the Browns as I see 2.5 point favorite on my screen, over under 41.5, which it's not the highest by any stretch, but it's not anemic either. So pretty even game. Injury front, I haven't seen much. Have you? Benny Snell, Roosevelt, Nix. That's about it. Ryan Switzer. Anyone else that you're really monitoring on the injury front?
Yeah, I think the big news was James Conner being back.
Yep.
I mean, that makes him a top play for sure, and Jalen Samuels is kind of relegated to the back of my list because he's still priced for being kind of the lead guy there. In addition, we have Ricky Seals-Jones questionable. He missed last game, so if he plays, he'll probably be the number 1 tight end for the Browns. If he's out, we might have to look to some backups.
Yeah, he's going to muddy a somewhat already crowded tight end situation, and we'll have to see. Obviously, Kareem Hunt is someone we're going to discuss at length. He is back in business. He got some pretty significant work last week for them, and as you mentioned, James Conner, most expensive guy on the slate. He looks like he's back, and that's a huge, huge bonus to the Steelers. We'll have to monitor. I'll get this right out. The inactives will come out much later, and you've mentioned a couple of times on this show, we do have to pay attention to that because you never know. Some of these fringe players sometimes aren't even active, and you can trim a couple percent right out of showdown with dead money if you're not paying attention.
Absolutely, and one guy I'm looking at really on the inactives list tonight is Callaway, Antonio Callaway for the Browns. He was inactive last game, kind of a surprise because, of course, he was suspended for the start of the season, but then he went and overtook Rashard Higgins on the depth chart as the wide receiver 3 in Cleveland, but then he was benched last week, so I really don't have a great idea what's going on there. I mean, I'd have to assume that he won't play this week, but if he's active, I mean, he might be a guy where people look at the box score and they're like, man, this guy got 0 last week.
No, it's true, and showdown is the only thing where you can say this guy might be inactive, but if he's not, maybe kind of interesting because he has some home run upside, and that's really what we've got going on. Browns. Oh, chat's already in rare form. Browns winning this game. We will see. I'll give a take on that later in the show, but let's get into it. I guess we'll start with the old Steelers, the road team here. We know Mason Rudolph is, it's his team right now with Big Ben permanently out. He has all the weapons back. We'll start with the quarterback because they are always the most important position out there. Do you like him? He hasn't been doing much, and he has a ton of skill positions around him. But what do you make of Rudolph right off the top?
I mean, the first stat I look at with quarterbacks is yards per attempt.
Okay.
He's only averaging 6.6, and the league average is 7.7. So, based on that metric, he's having a far below average season. His interception rate is 2%, which is less than average, which the average about 2.5%. So his ball control has been a little bit better than average, but he's not really moving it down the field by throwing the ball. He's only averaging 190 yards per game. It looks like that might include one where he didn't start though.
He really hasn't done much, and it's just I know it's a big leap, but man, this is the guy at Oklahoma State who was slinging it all over the place. 300-yard bonuses all the time, and now he hasn't even approached that. He's a virtual zero in the running game as well. Another out that you don't really have with a guy like Mason Rudolph. So it's a little tricky, and honestly, he's so boring. He actually hurts, and we'll get there. He kind of hurts the Cleveland defense because you mentioned he's not a wild man by any stretch right now. It seems like the Steelers are more just having him not lose the game and leaning on the run game, leaning on Connor, try to get Juju involved because it's hard to back a guy that doesn't really have a ton of upside here.
Yeah, and I mean that lack of rushing upside as well, that makes it harder for him to be the top scorer on the team. So if he's really having a good game, you might see Juju or Deontay Johnson have kind of the leading scorer, especially on DraftKings where it's PPR. On FanDuel at half point, then Mason Rudolph definitely in play at captain.
Yeah, it's you just look at a Steelers team and they've been getting by with very impressive defense, and again we're gonna get there. But you've mentioned Deontay Johnson is someone, he's playing just as many snaps as Juju. They're on the field a lot. They're both going to be heavily involved, and then Connor is back. So do you think, just jumping to running back real quick, that Connor immediately gets back to the workhorse role that we're used to seeing him in?
Yeah, I have to assume so because he only missed 1 week, I think, and usually if I'm really thinking a guy might be injured and he's back in, that'll be if it's several week absence. So I'm not really that concerned, but I haven't seen anything about whether he'll resume as far as the news front. So how are you interpreting this situation?
He doesn't have an injury tag from what I've seen. It was a shoulder. He missed a little time, but like you said, it wasn't a long extended absence. Last time we saw him was week 8 against Miami. We had 23 carries. I'm more with you. We know that Jalen Samuels is going to catch some balls out there, but other than that, maybe he cedes just a couple carries to someone like Edmonds. But I think this is James Conner's backfield. I understand the price. And in a lot of game scripts where this total is going under 41.5, it's hard not to look to someone like him, even in your captain and, of course, in your flex.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the running back, of course, has a little bit of an edge as being the top scorer because they don't have to share the points with anyone else when they get the rushing yards. So that's an advantage. And we did see one game where James Conner and Jalen Samuels kind of both were in the game at the same time, and that was pretty interesting. You think that might happen again tonight?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, you are the Jalen Samuels whisperer. Don't think I haven't forgot. And they can do a variety of things. And going back to Mason Rudolph just a little bit, part of the reason that his yards per attempt is down is because I think they're giving him short, easy throws. He hasn't been sacked a lot. He hasn't turned the ball over a lot. Now, if they're trailing, maybe he's forced to push it down the field. But guys like Connor, guys like Samuels, I think they can coexist, especially, in a showdown format where we know crazy things can happen.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny because that week where Jalen Samuels went off, people were messaging me in Slack. It's like, why do you have Jalen Samuels projected so high? I had him at like 7 points or something. Some of those situations, again, where you got to assume that maybe he takes the backseat to Connor, but you never really know. The only thing is that he's priced like he's the starter here, I think. And I'm not really landing on him when I'm generating optimal lineups. Are you?
Not really. You pointed out, Chaz pointed out, 8.8K on DraftKings, where that's his preferred site just because it's a full PPR over something like FanDuel. that is really lofty. He is absolutely priced as if he's a starter. You could take a discount to Juju. You could take a discount to a lot of other players. And I will certainly be doing that. What do you make of, we'll get to because I want to talk about Vance McDonald and I want to talk about James Washington, but just right off the bat, you have Juju, you have Deontay Johnson, the 1-2 punch right now on the outside. Do you have a preference? Clearly, Juju, I think, is the number one go-to guy, but he's going to draw, probably some tough coverage, and they will prioritize trying to limit him.
Yeah, I mean, Juju, he's been having an off year, and it's probably because he is the wide receiver one, getting tougher matchups this year. I think that's kind of incorporated into his stats so far. So he has been leading the team as far as catching the ball. It hasn't been impressive numbers by any means, and it's going to be dependent on the price. So 8,600, that looks like they're not really pricing him as really a stud play. So I think I'm happy enough to throw him in my roster.
Yeah, he's a guy. I think he's going to be a popular captain. He's very affordable, allows you to do a lot, and he's someone that I do think just a lot of people still recognize as that top end target. I'm not saying he isn't, but is having a down year, and a lot of that may be because defenses have the ability to really roll coverage to him. The more guys like Johnson and Washington step up, the harder it'll be to do that. But James Washington last week did exactly that. Big game, 6 for 90 and a touchdown. He did lose a fumble on a Peanut Tillman style punch out, but that's neither here nor there. What do you make of him? The targets are pretty steady, 5, 6, 7 a game. Do you like him kind of as one of the other Steelers pass catchers?
We're talking about Deontay Johnson?
I was saying James Washington.
James Washington.
Yeah, he had a good game last week.
Ooh, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan. He's
okay.
He hasn't had a terrible year as far as efficiency. He's caught half his balls for 16 yards per pass, so that's pretty solid. The one thing I usually look at, I mean, the snap counts are huge. That's going to determine how many targets are within the range of outcomes. So I have him projected to play about 2/3 of the snaps. Ryan Switzer being out is a little bit of a benefit there. He is targeted a decent amount when he's on the field, so about 19% of the time, which is a high mark. So if I'm playing James Washington, I'm really hoping that the Steelers play more 3 wide sets, and for that to happen, maybe you play a lineup where you have more Cleveland players.
Yeah, he's someone that I think is like most guys, but he is very needed in a certain game script. He has a lot where it goes wrong, and although he is coming off a good game, like I said, he caught a touchdown, 7 targets. That's a healthy amount, and you can live with that. It's still someone that relies kind of on breaking a play or really making the most of it. And then right below him in the price, you have another guy who's had 7 targets in 2 straight weeks in Vance McDonald. To me, a lower ceiling, but also a higher floor, to be honest. What do you make of the tight end for the Steelers?
I think, man, it's been a frustrating season for Vance because I had him as kind of like a draft pick to start the year, but it hasn't really materialized. Just the injury situation where he's been kind of banged up. They brought in Nick Vannett. I think Vance is back, though. I mean, last week he played most of the snaps, and he ran routes on most plays. And not getting targeted a ton when he's on the field this year, but that adds up to a pretty solid play, in my opinion. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, 97% of offensive snaps last week is huge. I was worried when they got Vannett that we might see more of but they're on the field enough together where it's not really affecting him. He's running the routes. He's getting the looks. You just need him to capitalize in the red zone. He's an athletic guy, but I still think a lot of his value is you got to catch a touchdown close down there. So in a matchup like this, I don't mind it. If I had to take an against the grain captain for the Steelers, I'd be more prone to go to a guy like Washington just because I think he's more live for a boom home run type play than someone like Vance McDonald.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Vance McDonald's only averaged 7.5 yards per catch this year. That is a really low figure. The only thing with Washington, as you said, like he had the big game last week, so maybe some people are on the train when they wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah, that's always people chase recency bias. You see it and you're like, oh, James Washington, here he comes. And that can be kind of a red flag. Other than that, you mentioned Switzer's out. Do I dare bring up Johnny Holton? I mean, that's extreme, but I'm just looking outside of the names we've mentioned for Pittsburgh. I'll open it up to you. Is there anybody else that you have any interest in as a flyer?
I'd say Holton, I guess. I mean, he's only 200, so as far as points per dollar, like that's off the chain, even if he's
Yeah,
only playing a few plays a game. But I generally don't favor Bills with the $200 guys. When you spend that much salary on every other guy, you end up having a lineup that's going to tie a ton.
absolutely. We've discussed that on the show, and I think it's worth mentioning once again. It's a natural funnel position to you correlate so strongly with the other top end salary guys, and it's just very difficult to separate. And the goal is to try to limit your dupes. So keep that in mind. We will save Chris Boswell and the defense for a little bit later. Do you want to move to the other side? My adopted fan base of the Cleveland Browns here. What do you say?
Yeah, man. Well, everyone's telling us in chat that they're going to win this game, so we might as well talk about them.
I guess so. Yeah, we gotta appease the masses here. I I was cautiously optimistic that they could get it done last week. They kept it dangerously close. Baker got it done in the end. It's still been a pretty down year for Baker. He's thrown too many picks. The offense has stalled despite a ton of talent. And now they draw a very difficult matchup, especially in the secondary. Pittsburgh's been phenomenal. They've been winning people a lot of money. If you're rostering that defense, we'll get there. But right off the bat, you have to start with Baker. 9 touchdowns, 12 picks on the year. Was clean last week, but what do you make of him going against the Steelers team?
Yeah, I think at this point, we have to assume, based on the 7.1 yards per time, which is lower than last year. I mean, he was at 7.7 last year, taking a little bit of a regression this year, and I have to say, I mean, he's not an above average quarterback, so a little bit better than Rudolph, but not a ton, and I think that's why this game could be so interesting. But I think that he might be a guy where the hype is a little bit exceeded the talent up to this point. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I am not a Baker guy. I think that it's just been terribly disappointing because he really has. We'll talk about these guys because we've got Odell, we've got Landry, he's got Chubb, he's got everything that you would really need to succeed, and it's just not happening. Truth be told, the offensive line has had some struggles, and it hasn't given him a ton of time. But you need to be better. So by virtue of it being a one-game slate, I certainly can't rule Baker out tonight. I have interest in this Cleveland team. I think, though, for me, and I think most people, Nick Chubb is going to be tasked with doing a lot. So what do you make of him? And then we'll get to Kareem Hunt, who returned last week.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb were on the field a decent amount last week, and that was something I didn't anticipate. It really shows that they're trying to incorporate both of these guys in a large role. So I think Chubb's rushing will be able to reduce. He did get 20 to 4 last week, but I think that Kareem Hunt had the better game. There was one series where Chubb got denied like 6 times in a row at the goal line.
Yep.
And I mean that probably they might try to give Hunt a few more looks this week. How do you feel like they're going to break it up this week?
It was legitimately. I was watching Red Zone, and that game was just on for like 15 minutes straight because they were on the 1-yard line and they could not get in. So Kareem Hunt, 9 targets. That is something, especially on DraftKings, that immediately is going to catch your eye. If the Browns are playing catch up, and this is a very competitive game, he is someone that could see a ton of easy, cheap throws. And boy, oh boy, does that add up quickly. I think the volume is still very secure for Chubb. You mentioned he had 24 touches last week when you throw in his targets. Maybe he seeds a couple of carries here and there, but he's going to have plenty of room to work. In a positive game script, if Cleveland does get the lead, I think Chubb will clearly be the guy trying to put this on ice late in the game. So both of them, to me, great options. I think you can pair them up, and I think a lot of people will relative to playing 2 running backs.
Yeah, I mean, it's encouraging that they were on the field so much. Last week, Chubb played 56 with 69 snaps. Hunt played 38. And Hilliard and Johnson even got in the game for 9 snaps combined. So that means they're averaging about 1.5 running backs per play in Cleveland now. I mean, it was a game where they're trailing most of the game, I believe. So if they're ahead this game, it might not be the same breakdown, but that's unusual, and that's got to give you some encouraging feedback if you want to have Hunt and Chubb together.
It really does, and like we've said, the Steelers' strength is in the secondary. I don't know why they would task Baker with having to push the ball down the field unless they're really trailing late in the game. Now there will be spots to pick your spots, but I think clearly that they are going to run Chubb early, try to establish it. You got Kareem Hunt, and as you mentioned, they're throwing backs out there all the time. So both of them are reasonably priced, in my opinion. Chubb comes in. He's the second most expensive guy, a little cheaper than Connor, but that doesn't surprise me. Who we haven't talked about yet, and even though it is a tough matchup, we've got Odell and we've got Jarvis. Clearly, Jarvis is more of a PPR guy. 10 targets last week, caught 9 of them, whereas Dell is more of a boom bust. 12 targets, caught 5 of them. What do you make of the 2 leading catchers on the Browns team?
Well, if you ever wanted to know who is better between Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham, this is your year to find out. Apparently, Landry is really holding his own because he's been doing better in both catch percentage and yards per catch this year than Beckham, which is surprising to say the least. And he's getting targeted almost the same rate. So these guys are kind of like 1A and 1B. Beckham has kind of the name brand, so I think he'll be more popular. But it's hard to really differentiate between which guy to go with. Is there any particular way you're leaning?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Both of these dudes, both LSU guys, they got a lot of similarities. For me, Odell still carries a little more slate breaking, where it's just like there's a lot of narratives to me where Odell is a captain that you need 1,000%, and then it's a 5-man tournament. Jarvis Landry doesn't carry that as much. I think he's a very solid play. I think we're going to see a lot of targets from him once again, and I think he'll rack up some catches. Odell, to me, still possesses that slate-breaking matchup. Now, Minkah Fitzpatrick, who they got from the Dolphins, the cornerback on the Steelers, has been fantastic. He's scoring touchdowns like there's no tomorrow. I'm sure they're going to be ready, but at the same time, they've got to find a way to get these guys involved. So the way I'm treating it, Odell more of a captain play, Landry more of a flex play for me.
It's interesting. One site that I've been looking at that has some single game contests is Super Draft, and they have Beckham at 1.4x in their multiplier system, and Landry is 1.75x. So do you like Beckham enough to really, if that's the difference, 0.35 points more per play? Or is that enough to get you on Landry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a consideration, of course. It's 2 guys again. I think what you really need to do with them is what we try to encourage with all of these is tell that story and see. I think Odell will have the opportunities over the top a little more than Landry, but at the same time, Landry is someone I feel much more confident gets a middling game at worst. I really think his targets will just be easier, a little more underneath the Pittsburgh zone here and there. So take it for what it is. Other than that, though, that's where it really drops off for me. I mean, this is a polarizing offense. You mentioned their third wide receiver. He was inactive, so they've got a bunch of guys vying for those extra targets. Whether you talk about Higgins, Callaway, Ratley, what do you make of kind of those secondary receiver plays for the Browns?
Well, it's hard to really love either one, regardless of whether Higgins or Callaway starts this game. It will be important which one's starting. So Higgins on the year, he's only been targeted 10% of the time he's run a route. So that's not really a guy that can win you a tournament, but he is cheap, so he makes stuff fit. On the other hand, Callaway's been targeted 14%. He's only averaged about 5.5 yards per target, which is pretty bad. I can see why he got benched. Higgins has been doing a lot more with the targets he's been getting. So I think that either way, they're pretty low-owned guys, and there is such variance of wide receivers that you can take some shots, but certainly not core plays.
Yeah, there's too many guys. Step one, of course, is what we said right off the top. Find out who's inactive and get rid of them, and then it should, glean some. Because if Callaway's out of the picture, Higgins should be, I think, in line for around half of the snaps out there, especially if they're trailing and going to more three wide receiver sets. I'm not saying the targets will correlate because he's going to be down in the pecking order, but step one is get on the field. I think we all know that, and we'll work down from there. So these are guys that, of course, they're going to hold more merit. If, say, you want to run Baker out as a captain or something, you're going to need a couple of his pass catchers, whether it's a back or some receivers. These are the type of guys that can fill into something like that. And I think it's a similar story with the tight ends. Now, Ricky Seals-Jones, you mentioned, is game time decision right now. Are you going to try to attack what is going to be a pretty crowded and ugly Browns tight end situation this week?
I mean, probably just because it's showdown. You got to play a little bit of everyone. So last week, I have PFF here pulled up, and Harris ran around on about 1/3 of the pass plays. This dude I haven't even heard of, Steven Carlson, was out there for 1/4 of the game, and Pharaoh Brown was also out there for 1/4 of the game. So no real standout option if Ricky Seals-Jones is out. But if Ricky Seals-Jones is in, you could expect him to maybe play about half the plays. So that would be your best bet of the tight ends.
Yeah, it's bad. You have two extremely cheap ones that I have limited interest in. I think you're almost banking they get one target and it's an end zone shot. I don't really chase that. So if Ricky Seals-Jones is in, it should, especially, he's got a Q tag right now. People who build earlier in the day are not going to click him. Now, when he's ruled in, if he is, obviously the ownership will catch up just a bit, but I still think he will be less owned relative to what he would be if he was already ruled in at the time we're doing this show. So that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, not a tremendous player, but having that little ownership advantage. If we're looking at the tournaments now, let's see how many people are entered, because that should give us some idea of how early people are building. Mm-hmm. Looks like 40,000 out of 130,000 on DraftKings have already built. I mean, we can assume by the time inactives are released, maybe that's like 2/3 of the tournament. And that means maybe only 1/3 of the tournament is even considering Ricky Seals-Jones.
Yeah, I mean, that is just I really do look at that in all sports where people, they if some people are busy and it's like, you know what, I'm not even going to worry about this. I'm not going to get burned by a guy who may not play. Let me just omit him. I don't like him anyway. And you can take advantage of that because it's all about ownership and leverage, which is one of the, it's the easy way to say it, one of the many tools that we have over on the site behind the paywall. We do have a couple things free today. I believe your rankings are in front of the paywall, giving people a chance to check out one of the many things we do have for Showdown.
Yeah, and those rankings, they're based on my projections, so it kind of gives you a little bit easier way to break down the players without having to do a ton of math. And you can get the rankings for only $3.95 a week. So that's really, if you're playing kind of low volume, you want to ease in to maybe get some more opinions on your lineups. And also, see what other people are doing with our ownership rankings. I think that's a pretty nice entry point.
Absolutely. It's all about catering. That's what we try to do. Cater, not give you too little, not give you too much. And that's really at the heart of it. But favorite part of the show, I think for me, I hope people would agree in chat. We got kickers, we got defense. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Steelers' defense is going to be very popular tonight. Baker has shown that he can turn the ball over, and they're playing out of their minds. It's just been ridiculous lately. Add in that defenses have been getting there, it seems like, every week in Showdown. I don't know how the masses don't get away. But what do you make of what I think will be an over-owned Steelers defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. There's this kind of general sense in the community, especially among people who are really getting into DFS this year, that defense is an essential part of your lineup, especially in Showdown, because of how much defense has won the slate. Now, these defenses are both in decent spots. I'd say that maybe Pittsburgh's is in a little bit better spot because Baker turns it over more and allows more sacks. Cleveland is the favorite in the game, so maybe they allow less points. But neither of these teams really have a obvious way to be a top scoring play, other than if the game just kind of is a dud and it's low scoring. So I think if the general community is kind of on the defense train of Showdown, it might make sense to go to maybe the kicker. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean and full disclosure, of course, this is what happens. I have been fading some of these chalk defenses, and it's been killing me. But I'm not deterred by, I really try to judge things right after lock. And if I see that the Steelers defense is, I'm just throwing out a number, but say 60% owned, that's a win. If they score 3 defensive touchdowns, it's going to be a loss for me, but long term, I'll take that every time. This is a defense that has scored a pair of touchdowns over the last 4 games. They've forced minimum of 3 turnovers in every game over the last 4 games. 4+ sacks in 3 straight games. Incredible numbers. All numbers that I don't think are sustainable. Yes, Baker is turnover prone, but this is a Browns team that is favorite. There are a lot of narratives that Baker keeps a clean card, as he did against the Bills, and then you are in huge trouble with the defense. Middling performances are not going to get it done for an over-owned Steelers defense. So I'm with you. Browns defense you're going to get an ownership discount, but as you mentioned right at the top, Mason Rudolph is not exactly taking many chances out there, and unless they can get a pass rush, I think it's more of the same on that front.
Yeah, their pass protection has a little bit of advantage over Cleveland tonight. I have Pittsburgh projected for about 3 sacks and Cleveland for about 2. I mean, that's not like a huge difference, but you're really hoping for that fluky play, and maybe that means that Pittsburgh gets one more chance at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that, and I wrote an article on the betting side that's available on the site. Go check it out. And I have a play in this game. And I talked about the Browns need to get a pass rush. I think they're capable of it, but if they don't, it's going to be a long night for them. That is the way to do it, because they got to keep, on the other side, Baker's got to avoid those turnovers. So and I am, yes, Chad, I am a glutton for punishment with the Brownies. It's true. No weather to speak of before we talk about kickers. I think it's just going to be a pretty standard night out there. But what do you make? Do you have a preference between the 2 kickers? Have you looked at the props? I know that's something you like to do sometimes. Any advantage you see with either of these kickers?
Yeah, I think that I give the edge to Cleveland's kicker, Seifert, because Cleveland's projected to score more points, and that generally means more extra points and more field goals. So a little bit of an edge there, but I think the kicker is a maligned position. The nice thing about the kicker, though, is that it's hard for them to be the top scoring play. Of course, if you have a kicker in the flex, you don't want them to be the top scoring play. You want them to be one of the next highest scoring. So they're really good in that respect. And based on my top plays tool, we have I messed up this guy's name, Seibert. He has a 13% chance of being one of the top 6 players, and only a 0.3% chance of being the top scoring player. And Boswell's about 11%. So I lean towards Seibert, but I would more likely just put in whatever kicker plays for the team that I have more players of.
Makes sense. And yeah, I think that just speaks to, cash setting. They're going to give you a decent floor, but at the same time, how is a kicker, barring a ridiculous game, going to get you more than 13, 15 points? It would take some type of fake or just a ridiculous situation. And I'm with you. So they make obvious flex plays when there's merit to getting someone in that range. You don't really have to worry about them in terms of captain. I let other people do that. So for me, that's really where I'm at. So let's just talk captain for a little bit. I know we mentioned it here. What are you going with the standard? We're going to try to take one of these receivers who can maybe get it going, or are you going to lean on maybe the backs, who overall I think are the best plays in the game?
Yeah, I think you gotta like Chubb, and Connor is probably being the highest percentage plays at captain. And the nice thing about them is that you might have an advantage over guys who put them in the flex, because looking at my model here, it looks like if Chubb is one of the top 6 players, there's a 1 in 3 chance that he's the top player. So you really are at a disadvantage if you put this guy in the flex compared to a captain. Connor, a lesser extent, but still these guys have a chance of about 40% chance combined of being the top scoring players of the week, and those are odds that you can really bank on. So, how are you feeling about the running backs at captain?
Yeah, I mean, normally I look for, a receiver because I think, just the way the showdown is unfolded. But in this game in particular, with a low total in a game that I think could be a grinded out, I'm very comfortable just taking what I think will be an obvious captain and maybe trying to work through it with some different leverage spots. Now, it's not to say that, again, I think against the grain, guys like James Washington, Odell is not against the grain, but he, of course, can warrant captain consideration. I get that, but I'm not going to no chance I have a defense in captain. I don't see that at all this week. And I think people will, especially with the Steelers. To me, that's a mistake.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake just because how high owned the defenses have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they've been winning people money, so people are going to go back to the well. It makes more sense to go to a guy that hasn't really produced recently. So I would probably avoid maybe Kareem Hunt at captain because he had a big game last week, and maybe go to, if I'm really digging deep, maybe Juju. He's been cold kind of this season. Maybe Higgins or Ricky Seals-Jones even. Like, if I was really trying to get contrarian, but the problem with these guys all is that when you put them at captain, it doesn't leave you many options for filling out the rest of your lineup. So I do really prefer the higher priced guys like captain, like Chubb and Connor. That gives you more flexibility and less duplication with the guys you're competing with.
Yeah, it's all about, it's such a delicate balance of, you don't want to just do crazy things to separate, but you also don't want to do something where there's not enough permutations to be unique and have a real path, because we've seen it time and time again. The worst showdown slates just for everybody. If 400 people tie for first, that's going to be pretty much a bad night for everybody. You don't want that. And even if you're one of those 400, yeah, it's nice to have it. But long term, you kind of feel like you almost missed out on your golden ticket. Before we give final thoughts and we're going to bounce on out of here, Chad, I do want to say, as I always do, we appreciate you Thursday afternoon hanging out with us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. We have so many shows going on, so you know when they are. But if you can hit the like button, it does a ton for us. Alex is better at whipping you guys into shape. He demands it and you guys do it, but I'm asking, help me out here and press that like button. And like I said, it does a ton for the company. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, Ben, you're being too nice, man.
I know.
So if you guys don't click the like button, you will receive a phone call in 7 days, and some crazy woman's going to crawl right out of your TV screen, and you're not going to like that.
The ring 3. Here we go. We got, yeah, like I said, you're living the life. People want to know, actually, there's been some comments and chats about the boxes. You're living your best life over there, getting some shipments of some quality stuff behind you.
Yeah, I gotta credit this to Chris Randone. I don't know if you guys can notice, but I had one with the Garden of Life weight loss bars. So maybe I'm a little bit more slender today.
You're ready, healthy life. There you go. Company is toning up. I said that before. We're gonna live our best life on this show, but it's an interesting game. I mean, I'll get it out there. I think it's no surprise to a lot of people. I do think that the Browns win this game. I like them at home tonight. I got it at 2.5. I think if it moves to 3, you want to be a little more cautious. But I expect that they find a way, and that starts with Baker keeping it clean. And I hope that's step one, because it will kill the Steelers' defense. That is definitely my big stand tonight. Going to be way underweight on them. Do you have one stand that kind of stands out to you before we hop on out of here?
I think my general advice is just play the tournament you're in. So like last week, I had a really interesting experience in Showdown where like there's some tournaments are a lot smaller fields. So like for example, this NFL Rush on FanDuel, $4 to enter 40,000 people. The Thursday night special, $9 to enter 105,000 people. And one thing that happened is I put some less contrarian lineups in the $4, or I can't remember exactly what tournament it was, but it was a lot smaller field. And I finished first. I had like the nut lineup, and I won more money in that tournament, even though the prize pool was more small than I would have in the big 100,000 person tournament. So the takeaway I got was that If you're playing these really, really big tournaments, you want to go more off the board than if you're playing in kind of the smaller field tournaments they offer.
One of the more, I think, undervalued thing is contest selection and understanding to build to that. I held office hours last night in our premium Slack chat, and I kind of dug into that on the golf side, which obviously is something that I do a lot. But it's true, and even within, so on some of these sites they run like say a big $10 and it fills, and then they run the secondary $10. It is incredible if you put in the same X amount of lineups, how much better ROI wise a lot of times you do in that secondary one, despite not having the massive prize pool up top. And it just shows really want to be cognizant of what you're building to and what type of tournament you're in. Know when to really make that off the wall play. Know when to make maybe a little more conservative play because you don't have to avoid 150,000 dupes. And that is really important. So any final thoughts, or is that how you want to leave it?
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't mentioned a ton is the correlation. So if you're playing your quarterback and captain, like obviously have a couple of guys that you start to. If you're playing them in the flex, only have maybe one guy, because if like 3 receivers on a team go off, then your quarterback is probably not going to be the 2nd through 5th highest scoring. He'll be the 1st.
Yep.
So have a lineup that has some path to victory.
Definitely. And a caveat, you sometimes, in my opinion, is running quarterbacks. We don't have that a ton, especially with Mason Rudolph. You're not going to get bailed out, barring something ridiculous, where he could run one in, and that changes the whole landscape of how he can get there. Like if you pair him with 3 receivers, I think you have to use him in the captain spot because there's just no other way that he can accrue those points. So I think that's healthy advice. And like I said, we will see what the inactives hold. There will be a couple injury news, and that will make some decisions. But just another game where I don't think we have polarizing options, and I like that. A lot of different options to go with. Competitive game in the AFC North, and it should be a fun one. So we're going to get on out of here. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Friends at Super Draft, check them out. Another good site that are doing a lot of good things. We will be back next week for another Thursday night showdown game. Someone in chat, go win all the money tonight, and then tweet us because we do love to see the big screenshot. So good luck, everyone, and we will see you next week.